it's just too close to call. They can't even call it yet. So.
Well, let's introduce you now to our local panel of political experts to discuss our election results. We have Ann Rydalch, a former legislator, Eric Simpson, also a former Idaho state legislator, and we have Miranda Marquardt, who is the acting chair of the the Bonneville County Democratic Party.
And you're our newest face to this whole entire election. I got to tell you, Miranda, basically in Bonneville County, we seriously thought about just having 2 Republicans on to kind of represent that is what
the
all
contested
it
races,
is.
yeah.
It's sort of the mainstream Republican and a little bit more conservative Republican. But we recognize there is a Democratic Party in Bonneville County and that you're new to running it, and so welcome.
Thank you. And I'm glad we're on because we're seeing some momentum. So
there you go. There you go. Okay, well, we definitely want to make it fair. So just quick reaction on the president's race so far, you guys. What do you think? Just your own opinions. You want to start, Ann?
Yeah.
I don't think it's, I don't see a third party.
You don't see that?
I don't see a third party materializing. I suspect that with the 1,237 votes that are needed to win as the delegates, that Trump will have those before the convention starts in July. I would see a chance that way to derail that would it be if they could, the third-party people that are for that would get people to not attend as delegates for the first part of the convention, and that would pull some delegate votes away from Trump. I don't see a third party.
Don't see it happening. What about you, Eric?
No, history has shown that third-party candidates destroy chances for Republicans, and that played out in '92 when George Bush lost in a 3-way race to Bill Clinton and Ross Perot, and then in 1996 when Bob Dole lost to Bill Clinton and Ross Perot.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the Democratic race here. You think that Bernie Sanders should pull out?
Well, I am actually a Bernie delegate to the Idaho State Democratic Convention,
okay.
so I probably would not say that it's time for Bernie to pull out. One of the great things about this race has been that we've been able to see kind of a new core to the Democratic Party, and they're influencing some policy and kind of changing things up a little bit. So even if he doesn't make it to be the actual nominee, I think it's very important for him to stay in it so that we can see this movement continue forward and see that reflected in the Democratic Party platform down the road.
Very good. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back with reaction to these local races today.
You're watching Campaign 2016. Campaign 2016 coverage continues.
Welcome back to our analysis of Campaign 2016 on the local level now. Some experts.
Yep, and we have talked a little bit with our Republican guests this evening, and they have explained that this is probably one of the ugliest primaries they've ever seen. And you have to understand that the primary in this neck of the woods is the race. You know, you're pretty well done. A lot of times there aren't even Democrats to run.
Sorry,
so,
Miranda.
But we have 3 this year. It's very exciting.
That's great. We want that. Eric, what did you see happening? It just seemed like it got, I mean, to the secret taping, you know, with a phone in the pocket, and trying to make a judge depose people. And could you get behind any of that?
Well, what I saw is the Civil War in the Republican Party continues on, and with some of these legislative races, what I saw was some of the establishment Republicans not only just trying to kick the conservatives out of the big tent, but relegate them to the outhouse.
But didn't the conservatives start that? The super conservatives were the first ones to close the tent. On the middle of the road.
But I'll give you a good example. Look at the district with Senator Brent Hill, where he basically promoted and gladly accepted the running mate to his incumbent House member. And that's very rare. You don't see that, where a senator in a district backs the opponent of a sitting House member. It's extremely rare, and I think it's dirty politics.
Your turn.
But there's a reason that that's happening, and it's kind of tied like fellow delegates that Ted Cruz can't get along with all of his people back in Washington, D.C. because none of the senators liked him. He's not a viable person that gets along with people, and that's what politics is about in the legislature. you have to be able to get along with your fellow legislators.
It
or you will
wasn't
have
like this when you
competition.
two were in office. Now, you were in office before you came on board, right, Eric?
What was it like? Everyone
It wasn't like
got
this.
together a little
Yeah,
better than
it
this,
wasn't
yeah.
like this. When I was in the Senate, it was a very congenial, everybody got along, you know, kind of thing. And then it was a little bit different when I was in the House, but not like it is today. It's,
And when you were there, Eric, was it?
It was
some
starting.
I
kind of-
went in
It
with
was
a
starting when you
very
went in.
conservative wing of Republicans,
Right.
and we, you know, we fought back gas tax increases and things like that, and it was unpopular, and we were there a long time. But let me tell you what I see as a real concern for the Republican Party and the legislature and the state in general, and I want people to know three numbers: 2.3, 3.3, and 1. In fiscal year 2011, the state's general fund was $2.3 billion. This year, it's $3.3 billion. That's $1 billion of additional spending in 6 years. That's irresponsible.
That almost makes me
yeah.
wonder if then you appreciate Ron Nate's consistent no vote on everything.
Absolutely, I do. So much so that I donated to his campaign. The thing that strikes me as very unique, though, is the AP, or the Idaho Statesman, ran a piece, and they said that 9 members of the legislature consistently voted against these budget bills. And I was thinking, there's 105 people in the legislature, and only 9 are saying no to the spending.
But no to everything.
No, they didn't say no to everything, but they voted against certain appropriations bills, as they should have. I'm telling you, folks, you need to be paying attention to how your elected officials are voting, because they're voting with your tax dollars.
Do you have any response to that, Ann?
well, it's really hard to, when education is requiring so much more to be given to education, and we've sometimes slighted them in the past. But I'm one of those that's in favor of low taxes, not no taxes.
Okay.
I'm in favor of less regulations, not no regulations.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Miranda?
Well, I just think it's interesting that we talk a lot about, hey, well, let's cut, but then we talk about how we want these nice things. We want to pay for education. We want to pay for health care for a lot of people who don't have access to that. We want to pay for infrastructure. We want to pay for these things, but where's the money going to come from? And one of the things that I find very interesting, and one of the things that many people I talk to, they're getting a little bit tired of this politics as usual here in Idaho, where people are willing to say, hey, you know, for my farm and ranch subsidy, I'm perfectly happy to take those federal dollars. I'm perfectly happy to take that money, but working with the Idaho citizens on our infrastructure and our health care and our education, the things that really matter to them, they're a little bit reluctant to do that, but they're cool. They're totally cool with their farm and ranch subsidies. So it's
And
kind
of course, I disagree with some of that simply because if you take the federal funding, you never know when it's going to be cut off, and then that leaves the state hanging.
You know, I remember
And-
that on the Medicaid expansion, Ann, but nobody could come up with a single example of that ever happening, ever.
Well,
not
I've
for
seen
Medicaid,
it happen.
but not
Can you
for,
give-
but not
Not for that
specifically
one.
for
Not
Medicaid.
for that,
For
no.
Medicaid, it's never happened, and you know, but any federal dollars you get are subject to that at one point or another. And even if you're going to say, okay, well, I'm not going to take the federal money, at the same time, it's one thing to say, oh, well, I'm willing to take federal money for my own personal farm and ranch business, but hey, let's go ahead and kick that Healthy Idaho down. Let's kick that can on down the road once again and leave tens of thousands of Idahoans
I think
without
one thing
viable
that
health
we
care.
have to remember that, which the National Congress should have, is it's in our Constitution, we have to balance the budget.
And
Yes.
And so we can't
Yeah.
spend more than we take
Than we
in.
have.
quick break from our discussion. We have final numbers now from Power County. We want to share those with you so that we know exactly where things stand in Power County. Let's see. We got the Arbor Elementary supplemental levy, and we got the in favor 87%. So it looks like that has passed.
That's good.
100% of the votes. Let's see what else we have from Power County, as well as the supplemental levy. Or do we have anything else from there right now?
Just takes Jan a little time to pop it up. While
There
you
we go.
go ahead and look at those numbers while they're coming up, because we haven't had anything from Power County all night long. Meanwhile, let me ask you guys a little bit. Do you think the Republican Party in Idaho needs to come together, needs to be more unified? Or should it
Well-
just continue to be this power struggle where the moderates or mainstream try really hard to beat the ultra-conservatives and vice versa?
I
Until
think-
eventually one part of that party becomes the main.
We've seen a little bit of that in Bonneville County Republican Party, but I think the thing that is frustrating to us that have been involved is that they're not following the rules, the state party rules or the Bonneville County rules and regulations and bylaws. And they're doing things illegally because they're not following the laws. So that's where I have had a problem with some of the things that have happened. Yes, there has to be a unity. Chairman of the State Republican Party, Steve Yates, is working to do that. We've seen a tremendous influence with his leadership in doing that to unify the party, and that does have to come. I have no problem that there are more conservative or less conservative. We have what we call a big tent, so to speak, but it has to be unified.
We used to have a really big tent, but I'm not sure the Republican Party in Idaho does anymore. They couldn't even get through a convention.
That's because we've got so many people picking at the Republican Party that we haven't had in the past. We've got the Liberty Caucus, we've got the Libertarian Party, we've got the John Birch Society, we've got the Tea Party, we've got all of these things, different groups that are trying to take over the Republican Party. And that happened even over 30 years ago. There was a takeover attempt in Bonneville County by the John Birch Society members.
Interesting how history kind of
And
repeats
so
itself in some
history
ways.
is
Well, in
now
fact,
coming back and
Isn't
repeating.
Chick Hyleson?
Yes, he was a
John
region-
Bircher.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's back in
I can tell
politics.
Eric wants to say something. We have to go to a break, so hold that thought for just a minute. We'll go to a quick break and be right back.
You're watching Campaign 2016. Campaign 2016 coverage continues.
All right, look at this race, you guys. Look how close this is. This is Doug Ricks, Ron Nate. You guys, wouldn't this be a perfect example of your ultra-conservative Ron
Yes.
Nate and your more moderate conservative Doug
Or
Ricks?
mainstream is what Ann
Mainstream
likes to
is the
say.
word
Some
you
people like the word
Mainstream
moderate.
Republican?
Yeah,
Okay.
Well,
so-
and Doug Ricks, with that last name of Ricks, his father was a state senator and lieutenant governor, Mark Ricks.
19 votes separating them at this point. Does this surprise you, Eric?
I knew it was going to be a close race because there was a lot of special interest money coming into that race. Now, you talked about the division in the party.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to continue on, and the reason there's division is because conservatives, people who generally are fiscal and social conservatives, don't see that the Republican Party is representing them anymore. If you look at what's happened in Washington, I think the biggest myth in politics is that the Republicans and Democrats can't get along in Washington. The problem is they're getting along too well. $19 trillion in debt, bloated federal budgets, and we're seeing kind of a small equivalent of that in the state of Idaho. Excessive spending in the legislature. I'm not seeing any fiscal conservatism. I don't recognize this party anymore.
So do we want to cut back on teacher salaries again and education that when it's just is finally getting up to
Where it was 10 years ago?
Almost
Jay,
2009 levels.
I don't think anybody's promoting cutting teacher salaries. I'll give you an idea. When I was in office, Representative McGeehan, my seatmate, she ran a bill which basically would have compelled the state to only raise budgets by the rate of inflation of that given year. The bill never got a hearing. So where's the fiscal conservatism? We keep hearing how Idaho is such a conservative state. It's not a conservative state.
By comparison, though, it is. If you compare it to many other states, unless you go to the south, Idaho is pretty conservative.
We are a conservative
We are a
state.
very conservative
We're just
state.
not a John Birch Society state. and we're not a libertarian society state.
So it's all in I guess your definition of what conservatism
That's
is.
right.
I think that's hard
And
to
as
say.
long as
And there were
Right.
many
That's right.
attempts during the primary election for people to define themselves as a common sense conservative, a compassionate conservative, a small town conservative. And it's sort of like that term, you know, if somebody says you're beautiful, well, who defines who's beautiful? Who defines
I'm in
who's a
charge of
conservative?
that.
But what's so interesting, you were telling me earlier, Eric, that you differ from a lot of your conservative friends on Medicaid expansion.
I do. And I'll agree with the Democrat
Wow.
on the
All right.
panel. I think
What?
I think it's unfortunate and it's foolish for people to fall on their sword over this issue and basically say no to Medicaid expansion. And the reason
Because
they're
of strings
using
attached.
that excuse is they're saying, well, there's all these strings attached to the federal dollars. I can tell you what, the state of Idaho gets a lot of federal dollars for roads, education, health and welfare, and yet they're
Subsidies.
choosing this issue to fall on their sword over when people's lives are really at stake here. I think it's irresponsible.
But Ann has a different, you've already expressed your viewpoint that
I-
the
I-
The
state may
federal
hold-
dollars could be cut.
federal dollars could be done, but I'd rather control what the process is going to be rather than have the federal government control.
But we are in
Well,
I'd
control
have
of the
we
a
did that
process.
with the state exchange, and quite frankly, did a really good job with that.
We
I'd
did.
rather have the state control it than the feds.
And it's great that the state is control it. I love the state exchange. I used it, but part of the problem is we still have that gap happening, and the state's in control of fixing that gap. And so far, they've just been kicking it on down the road.
That needs to be fixed.
Every year. Oh well, let's do a new panel. Oh well, here's what the panel recommended. Well, let's ignore what the panel recommended and let's make a new panel. And it's getting kind of ridiculous, frankly, and I think what it comes down to is, all right, yes, we have to use our tax dollars to take care of these things like infrastructure, like education. These things matter to Idahoans in our everyday lives, and you have to sit back and say, all right, we do need money to do this, and what are our priorities? What are our priorities as Idahoans, and what do we want to see coming from our state?
So Smith-Zollinger race is one. Do you happen to have the latest numbers right there? That's one that is kind of the battle between these two forces. We'll take a look at those right after the break. But
We do have some final
in the
numbers
meantime-
out of Bonneville County. We'll show those to you right now, and then we'll be back.
You're watching Campaign 2016. Campaign 2016 coverage continues.
All right, now this is a huge surprise to our people on the panel here. Really quite a big surprise. Who wants to go first on this one? It's that Brian Zollinger, who was backed by Doyle Beck and is the more right-wing part of the party, won when there was just so much controversy surrounding that whole thing. Who wants to start?
Jay,
Sir.
I'm really surprised by that result in that legislative district. And the reason is District 33 is really like a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third Independent. And so what those numbers tell me is we had such a low voter turnout in the primary that the far right of the Republican Party turned out more than the moderate side of the party.
And they felt very strongly about that. Your reaction to that, Ann? Are you surprised?
I'm very surprised, too. I was very, very encouraged with the credibility of David Smith, and being a forensic analyst and certified public accountant, I thought would be a tremendous asset
In the
as a
legislature.
state legislator. So very
Not-
surprised.
You were just saying, Eric, there's one thing you guys all agree on. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard some division in our positions, but I think we all agree that there shouldn't be any sales tax on food in the state. And,
Okay.
and that's an issue that for 2 legislative sessions in a row, the Speaker of the House, Scott Bedke, who claims, you know, the Capitol is supposed to be a discussion of the arena of ideas, has not allowed a hearing on this issue.
All right, so we just have about a minute left here. Final thoughts for each of you. Let's start on the end here with the Democrat.
Yeah, so I just think that it's a very interesting time to be in Idaho Falls. I recently moved back here in August. I grew up here in Idaho Falls. And I think it's an interesting time to be back in the state and be in a place of transition where we can see some great changes happen.
Thanks, Miranda, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having
A
me.
lot of literature in these races. I encourage people to go see how your legislators are voting. Don't believe the literature. Look at how they vote. That's all that matters.
I guess I've been involved in the party. I find the people that criticize the party so much are the people that are not ever involved in the party. So that's, I've been involved in the Republican Party for so many years, and I hate to see it being taken over by another philosophy and not be acceptable as everyone coming in, but under the core values of what the
they
Republican
need to learn
Party
to
stands
agree to
for.
disagree like we do.
Maybe
huh?
so. Yeah,
Just act like Jay and I.
This is really the same nationally, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
We're seeing exactly the same thing. This is kind of a microcosm
Yep.
of what we're seeing
Yeah.
in the nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
All
we're-
right, you guys. Thank you. You have done a wonderful job
Thanks.
with us tonight, and we'll see you again at the general election. And we will leave you with some final numbers that you may not have seen yet tonight. Thank you for joining us, and on our website we will have all the numbers as they come in.
Localnews8.com. Good night, everyone.